Good evening. My name is Dr. Ariel Mintz. I'm the Executive Director of Refuah HaNefesh, and welcome to this latest live conversation titled When the Mind Becomes a Battlefield, Living with OCD. Today we are privileged to have Simmy Weinberger with us. And before I tell you about her, I'd like to remind everyone that if you're watching on Facebook, you could post a comment on Facebook if you'd like your question answered by Simmy. You could also anonymously send it to info@refuathanefesh.org, info@refuathanefesh.org, and we'll be happy to pass that question on to Simmy. If you ask it during the live conversation, we'll try to get to it during the conversation. Otherwise, we'll pass it on to her afterward, and she'll try her best to respond to you. So again, tonight we're privileged to have Simmy Weinberger with us. Simmy Weinberger is a very courageous woman who, from an early age, suffered quite a bit of trauma. She developed an eating disorder at the age of 10. At the age of 17, she was diagnosed with OCD. And in her 20s, she began self-harming and had significant suicidal ideation. Simmy is very passionate about using the journey that she's gone through and all the struggles she's experienced in order to encourage other people who may be going through those same struggles. And despite the potential consequences that may come up from her coming on this program and talking to the world about what she's been through, she has decided very bravely to come on and tell the world about her experiences so that others who are out there will know that they're not alone and that other people are also suffering with OCD. So Simmy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I guess we'll start this conversation by just discussing the title. So it's titled again, When the Mind Becomes a Battlefield, Living with OCD. Tell us why you chose that title.
Hi everyone, I'm Simmy. Thank you so much. I feel like it's an honor to be doing this presentation. When I was asked to come up with a title for the presentation, the word battlefield felt like the perfect word to describe what was going on in my mind throughout the years of struggling. Literally a battlefield, that's what it felt like. I didn't have to do too much thinking. It was the word that popped in, and so I coined it.
Okay. And so you find that living with OCD really is a battlefield. Can you talk more about kind of some of the symptoms that you have, what it is that makes it into a battlefield for those of us that might not be familiar with OCD?
Sure. So it's definitely played out in different ways over the years. I guess I can backtrack and then go to nowadays. When I was 17 was when I was first given the diagnosis of OCD, the official diagnosis. I definitely had, tendencies for anxiety, and I had panic attacks when I was younger than that. But the clear defining symptoms of OCD, which for whoever is not familiar with it, it's obsessive compulsive disorder, which manifests in various different ways in people. The way it manifested for me was the constant obsession with regards to religion, with regards to God, specifically with davening, with prayer. And it would start with an obsessive thought of how I have to say it. And then I would have to, the anxiety that's behind the obsessions is what drove me to compulsively act out the thoughts of, davening would take me hours and hours. I would have thank you lists, and I feel the need to write down everything that I'm thanking God for every night. And the fear behind that was that if I didn't write it, then all those things would be taken away from me. So it's a constant obsession of, for me, that's the way it played out. And the compulsion to either thank God so that it doesn't get taken away or say the prayer for endless amounts of time. So, interestingly enough, while I was in the height of my disorder and my struggling, I actually didn't even realize that I was struggling. I was just in my own world. I felt like this was the only way to do it. And I didn't realize that I was struggling. Nowadays, where it's not so active, and I'm aware that it's obsessive thoughts, I'm more able to work with it.
So let me ask you, I mean, so this Refuah Nefesh is a Jewish organization. The majority of our followers are part of the Jewish community. And so I imagine this is something that a lot of people can relate to, you know, maybe some of this excessive guilt about not doing things right from the Jewish perspective. When your thoughts, when your obsession and compulsion manifest in your religiosity and how you perform, you know, the Jewish rituals, how do you go back and perform those rituals while not letting the obsession and compulsions overtake you?
Now in recovery, is that what you're asking?
Yes. Or do you? Maybe you've had to kind of avoid a lot of the things that you did in the past.
So it's definitely been a big issue for me. I definitely had times where I went to the other extreme and prayer was like off the list, to be honest, which is kind of sad because it's something that was meaningful to me in the past. And then I tried to find some balance. Definitely, it's not a linear pathway, and I definitely still have some things. I mean, for me, with religion, it was specifically the praying. So it's definitely been, you know, since the height of it at 17, I definitely had struggled to open up a sitter again. Sometimes I just, you know, do the prayers in my own words. It's definitely has had an impact. You know, this is just my experience and my way of handling it. That's not to say that, you know, that's the way everyone should, or, you know, not giving the the go ahead to do as such. But specifically for me, you know, when I felt like I was capable of opening a sitter, I did that. When I felt like, you know, it was just too much for me, I didn't. What really helped with regards to that was, in my mind, and this I may have heard from someone, but I don't remember the source, so I'm not going to quote it. But I felt like religion wasn't supposed to be a pressure. So that's how I gauge when it's my obsession or when it's coming from a healthy place. If it starts feeling like a pressure, if the davening feels like a pressure, if I dread it and I just want it to be over because I don't want to have to deal with the whole, you know, the whole obsessive compulsion part of it, that's what's an indication for me that it's obsession. And I purposely don't do the davening in those moments because I know it's not going to go anywhere good. So I work with my mind a lot. I'm much more aware of what's going on in my mind. So I guess I'm fortunate and it's easier to work with. But this was not always the case.
And so it sounds like you're very insightful and you recognize a lot of the symptoms and maybe you're able to avoid going deep into them and them getting worse by avoiding the things that are going to make them worse. But do you mind me asking, have you gotten any specific advice in terms of religiosity from therapists, rabbis, or anyone else that might have some input on this?
So I appreciate you asking that. Actually, Rabbi Hendler from Baltimore, I did reach out to him via email prior to this presentation to ask if it was okay that I shared some of his tips. He didn't respond. I'm sure, you know, it was a couple of days ago only, but I will take the liberty of quoting him anyway. I'm sure he'd be happy that I share this. So he spoke on the Chaskeinu hotline. Chaskeinu is an organization similar to Refuah Nefesh that tries to support women struggling with mental illness, support family members. It is exclusively for women, but they have speakers and their message is the same in trying to end the stigma of mental illness. So he spoke on the line and I really appreciated his way of explaining it. He says that the brain is an organ just like any other organ. You know, the lungs produce air, or rather, let's do it, the kidneys is a simple example. The kidneys produce urine, but we're not our kidneys or our urine. The brain produces thoughts, and we're not our thoughts or our brain. And I appreciated that because in my mind, it was always like, well, it's my brain. So if it's my brain telling me, it must be true. How could it not be true if it's my brain? And to be able to hear that, and I guess it's comforting to hear from a rabbi because I know that for my OCD likes to hear it from a rabbi. You know, to give me that, to quiet the guilt and the anxiety involved. So, you know, that was very, very helpful in terms of being able to realize that not everything that my brain is telling me is true. He does he does suggest the 3-second rule. And in that 3-second rule, he says his advice is that if a person's feeling that intense anxiety that they have to act out in whatever way that plays out for them, if they can give an answer in 3 seconds of whether there's an immediate reason to be anxious about, there's immediate danger, then you can know that you can trust your thoughts, and you can know that it's, because if there was a lion in the room, you wouldn't need 3 seconds to be able to decide that. If it takes longer than 3 seconds, or you're not sure, you have to think about it, that would be a good indication that it's undue, like unnecessary anxiety for the present situation. That was his method in general in terms of thoughts. I don't know if he wasn't highlighting specifically on the religious part of it, but in general he does suggest, like if a person's in the middle of eating lunch and obsessive thought comes in, to continue doing, not to stop to deal with the thought, to continue doing whatever they're doing. If they were eating lunch and they got an obsession, continue eating lunch. That was something that helped me also, to break the cycle. So I get a thought, it's there, and I can just continue doing what I'm doing.
Sure. A lot of times with religiosity, I know especially this comes up for married women with NIDA, they're kind of checking and rechecking, and they're asking Shilohs again and again and again. And obviously each person, has to discuss this with their own people that they're comfortable with. But a lot of times the psak that's given is you're not allowed to ask any more Shilohs. Because people have a tendency when they have OCD, especially when it manifests with religiosity, that they're kind of looking for comfort from somebody, looking for someone to reassure them, and they'll ask again and again and again the same Shilohs. Have you found for yourself that you've asked more Shilohs than maybe some other people
So that's a tough one. I hear both sides. Coming from someone that struggled with OCD, I can definitely relate to the need for reassurance. What I can also say is that it doesn't matter how many times I was reassured, it never comforted, because that's the nature of OCD. The obsessive thought would come in, I would compulsively act, quench my anxiety for 5 seconds, only to repeat the same. So from that side, I know that no amount of reassurance would necessarily work. From the rabbi's perspective, I can't speak for them, but that's maybe where they were coming from, knowing that no amount of questioning would satisfy the individual asking.
Sure.
But it's definitely a complicated balance.
Do you think that being a religious Jew caused your OCD, or do you think it would have happened anyways and maybe in a different way?
I'm laughing because it's such a common question that comes up, and even when I Google like OCD and stuff, it's a common question. So no, I don't think that. I think that I have, brain tendency, like genetic tendencies to be obsessive and to have obsessive thinking, and definitely, religion was not the cause. And I think that's, I would venture to say that that's across the board. There are plenty of Christians that have OCD with their religion. There are plenty of, Muslims or any other religion that have OCD not regarding their religion, with hand washing, with, other stuff. So I think OCD in of itself is a disease, and it's, religion is not the cause of it. What I can say for myself, though, is that I think the reason why it played out for me specifically with religion, sometimes I wonder and I think, how come it played out like that? How come I didn't get the obsession to wash my hands all the time? Or, some other form of obsession. And, sometimes it seems like, oh, that would have been easier for me. And of course, we don't get to choose how and where and what and when about our challenges. But I think the reason why it played out with religion for me was because I am, I'm very spiritual by nature. And I think religion was an important factor in my life. So I feel like that's why, if I'm correct, I think the science behind OCD is that it tends to attack in areas that are important to one's life. So for me, religion was an important, part of my life. So I think that's the reason it attacked as such.
Yeah, and the research does back that up as you're describing it. I wonder, in many in many mental health conditions, so prayer is such an important part of recovery. There's so many studies showing that people that pray are able to, especially with anxiety and depression, it's so helpful for them in terms of combating their mental illness. But for you, obviously, you're in a little bit of a predicament. If you pray, it might make your mental illness worse. Are there parts of the religion that you feel have made your OCD easier to cope with, or in terms of maybe the community or any other parts of it? Has religion helped, or has the religion in general just made it harder because that's how it's manifested for you?
So I would love to be positive and say that it's all, lovely and dandy. It definitely has, to be honest and to say it as it is, it's definitely been challenging. It's definitely affected my ability to, go back to the way I was with religion, in a healthy way, with regards to prayer and just religion in general. And I do agree that religion, praying is a big part of recovery from, different sorts of challenges. And I am in a 12-step program, and 12-step programs, if people are not familiar, are not religious in any nature, but it is spiritual and does involve a higher power and connection to higher power. And to be honest, because of my OCD, I do struggle with that. It's still a daily struggle. I'm functioning. It doesn't affect my ability to function in the way that it did when I was 17, but it's definitely something that poses an extra challenge over all the other challenges.
Sure. So in your bio, you mentioned the fact that preceding all of the different mental illnesses that you developed, you experienced trauma as a young child. And clinically, that's something I've seen a lot, that trauma, as little as we like to talk about it, in terms of people that have mental illness within the Orthodox community, it's so pervasive. Whatever the trauma is, and there's so many different traumas that you could have. But oftentimes, we recognize whatever the mental illness is first, and it's only later that people are willing to open up and talk about the trauma. And I often find that's the underlying cause of a lot of the illness. Would you say that in your case, do you think that the trauma led to the mental illness that you've experienced? And obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, you don't know, but do you relate them to each other?
So I definitely can agree with what over my journey, I definitely can agree that, I'm not going to say this across the board, but I definitely would say that a lot of mental illnesses, from depression, bipolar, borderline, OCD, do stem from trauma. OCD was definitely not a direct result, because I first struggled with an eating disorder for 7 years before that. The eating disorder was definitely a result of trauma. And I think, I guess it's always that balance between nature versus nurture, and how much, is there a genetic predisposition to any of these kind of illnesses. I think in general, knowing my nature, I was probably predisposed to OCD, being a perfectionist, and and in general, I did have anxiety, for years before the OCD played out. But I did have some obsessive tendencies, even with the eating disorder, with calorie counting. So there was definitely, traits of OCD that were displayed prior to 17, but that was the age that I officially got diagnosed, when the prayer got out of control and I just wasn't functioning. But it's, as you say, I don't have the crystal ball, and it's hard to know if, even from the eating disorder, if that messed up with things in my brain and set something off. So it's hard to know. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the comorbidity, so you mentioned, the OCD, the eating disorder, suicidal ideation. And we know, there's great research backing up the fact that with every mental illness that you're diagnosed with, you're more likely to have another mental illness. The comorbidity in terms of mental illness is just, it's huge. It's so clear that mental illnesses run together. Have you found that when one of your, let's say the OCD is acting up, does the eating disorder and the suicidal ideation act up at the same time, or are they at different times? How do they manifest for you?
So through my history, it definitely had like distinct periods. I had the period of the eating disorder. I had the period of the OCD. Not to say that, the eating disorder was completely gone, but different things were, of higher priority. I'm trying to think if I had any of them at the same time, coexisting. I think in general, when I'm struggling, it goes hand in hand. Like if my depression gets activated, the eating stuff will be more difficult. I think I'll have more time just to be able to obsess. So I think to some extent, when I'm not doing well with one, it kind of affects the other ones. But I don't know, the OCD seems to have its own little track for me, and it doesn't seem as related to the other struggles.
That one comes on by itself, not in correlation with.
Yeah, I'll just have its flare-ups whenever it so chooses.
Okay. And does that exacerbate the eating disorder and the suicide ideation, or it's really completely separate?
It kind of seems separate for me.
Okay. Well, one of the interesting things I find about OCD is that, it's not one of the most common mental illnesses. It's not the least common, but, in a given year, somewhere maybe around 2% of people will experience OCD. They'll experience obsessions and compulsions. But we know that it is one of the most debilitating illnesses, not just a mental illness, but in all illnesses. I think the World Health Organization ranks OCD as the number 10 most handicapping conditions in terms of lost income and decreased quality of life. So it's quite severe when it happens to people, but it's not happening to as many people as, depression, heart disease, cancer. So I think there's less awareness of it. Although it has a huge impact on the people it's affecting. With that, it's hard to kind of form a whole support team around that to get people really rallying for it, because there's less people that might have it themselves or have a family member. Do you have any suggestions in how we could begin to form that support and make people more aware of OCD and make it a cause that they're interested in?
That's a good question. I actually was not aware that there's, of the percentage. I definitely will agree that it's debilitating. In the height of my disease, I was definitely non-functional. In terms of rallying for it, I mean, I think there's a general rallying for mental illness in general and trying to end the stigma. I'm not sure I have anything specific, specific ideas with regard to the OCD. I mean, I do know that there are studies going on, and I think they are trying to, find out more about it and figure out more about the brain and how it works. I actually recently partook in a study for OCD at the Nathan Klein Institute. So I know that there's work out there going on. I'm not sure.
Sure. And there's definitely a lot of research figuring out, what causes it genetically, what anatomical changes there are in the brain, what neurochemical differences there are. And there's even, some surgeries that are being done and some, deep brain stimulation maybe that can help. There's definitely some treatments coming out. But I think it's quite unfortunate that people seem not to understand it. I think a similar thing exists with psychosis, where people are very afraid of psychosis because, schizophrenia affects about 1% of the population. And so what that means is that a lot of people are never going to have a relative that have it. They might see it on the street, especially with the homeless population, and some of that scares them. They hear about people with psychotic disorders being violent, and, they don't want to be anywhere near that, but they don't understand it. I know, there's some places that you could go to and you could put headphones on and you could kind of experience what it's like to have a psychotic disorder with having the hallucination. And I think that's a fantastic idea. I wonder if maybe we could try something similar with OCD, where you just have constant, voices in your head telling you, do that, do that, do that, do that. Obviously, you can't imitate a compulsion as much, but you can see what it's like maybe to live with an obsession. I think sometimes when you put people in another person's shoes, let them experience what they're going through, it leads to more empathy and sympathy and compassion, and they can understand it a little more. But I think we do have a lot of work to go in terms of trying to figure out how to get people to understand OCD when it also is a little bit of a scary condition. We see people that are doing things that seem really strange to us. A lot of times we're afraid to approach them and ask them what's going on. And, we don't want anything to do with that, as opposed to really understanding and developing that compassion, which, especially the Jewish community, I think that's something that we should be doing.
I mean, I think that's such a cool idea. I think that's a great idea. I actually never heard of that with, the earphones and psychosis. I think that's a fascinating idea. All the person needs to hear is 5 minutes of that chatter, and they'll know, they'll be able to come to understand how exhausting OCD can be.
Yes.
It's exhausting, simply put. It's torture and it's exhausting. Those are the two, most important words that I can use to describe it.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very difficult condition to live with, and you really can't understand if you haven't lived with it. For those who are just joining us now, we're about halfway through this wonderful live conversation with Simmy Weinberger, who's talking to us about living with OCD. So far, it's been a fantastic conversation. I encourage those who are just coming in now, when this is all done, to go back and rewind, listen from the beginning, because it's really been really great. We are still taking questions. If people would like to ask questions, you can either comment on the Facebook page, or if you're watching on the website, or if you want to remain anonymous, you could send your questions to info@refuatnefesh.org. Simmy's open to pretty much any question you would like to ask, so feel free to ask whatever's on your mind, and try to understand what it's like to live with OCD a little bit, even if you yourself don't know anyone that has it, because we are one big community, and it's really important that we all come together and try to help each other out, because even though it's a small number, but it's really not that small. 1 in 50 people in our community as well are living with OCD, and it really impacts their whole life. So we do have a question right now that I'll get to before I ask more of my own questions. And this question comes from Eitan Neiman. And so first he says, thank you for doing this, Simmy. It means a lot. And he would like to know, he says, can you speak to what it was like going through mental illness throughout childhood? And do you think there is something that someone could have done differently so you could move to a healthier place earlier on in your life?
So I can definitely, sharing from my experience, I can definitely say that really whatever needed to be done was, all the steps that were needed to be taken were taken. I'm very, very fortunate that my parents actually did not buy into the stigma, or at least they cared about me more than caring about the stigma. They got me help right away. From the start of my eating disorder, they were seeking help and reading up and trying to understand it. With regards to the OCD, they, during that main year, age 17, I wasn't functional, and my parents did get the help that I needed. I was admitted to a hospital. They worked with the team there in terms of, obviously they weren't familiar with what the, real laws were with regard to prayer and all that. So they worked together with my parents to, coordinate and figure out something that would work, based on, Judaism, but also from a psychiatric standpoint. So I would have to say that, yes, everything was, all the steps were taken. I don't think, at this point, I don't think there was anything else that could have been done differently to help things move along, quicker than they did and than they are.
And I think you're very fortunate that you had that situation. As you mentioned before, there's so many genetic and environmental factors that, play at it together. And you could have the perfect childhood, but if the genetics are there, you might still develop OCD or some other illness. We definitely do know, though, that, parents, there's a lot they could do to help their kids avoid mental illness. When it does happen, it's definitely not their fault, and you have to be careful not to look back and say, what could I have done differently? Because probably not all that much, because a lot of times it's just going to happen regardless, as Simmy's pointing out here with that example. We have another question. Well, we had an anonymous comment that someone would like to hear you speak more than me. So I'm going to try to keep my comments to a minimum.
Okay.
And we'll try to let you do most of the talking. But another question came in. This is from Sarah Pollock. And she wants to know if you have any specific hobbies that you do to distract yourself from your obsessive thoughts.
So the word distracting is a good one. I can definitely say that no, without a shadow of a doubt, when I have free time, that's like an invitation for the OCD. Free time, non-structured days. It's almost like it's waiting there dormant and it will use any opportunity to attack. Um, I'm still wondering why that happens, what's behind that. And, when you shared before about the science, the studies that they're doing about the brain and all that, sometimes I do joke with friends and say, I just wonder what's going on there. Like, I would just love to see, the pathways and,
Yeah.
if it wasn't me struggling and if it wasn't other people struggling, I think it's fascinating. But definitely idle time is like an invitation for it. And in terms of distracting, I mean, recently I came up with this, and it's probably not something that I came up with, but the way, it presented in my mind was, and this can work with all emotions. Generally, I would either fight the emotion because I didn't want to have it. If I was having anxiety, or if I was having anxiety related to an obsessive thought, my go-to would be either to fight that emotion. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to, trying anything to get rid of it, or I would just rehash it in my brain and feed it. And I realized that both of those methods just exacerbate whatever it is that was going on in the moment. And when I can just take a moment to, take the moment and take the time to acknowledge what's going on and just let it be, not try to fight it, not try to feed it, not try to distract, just let it be as it is. It's amazing to see how it, within minutes, it just vanishes as if it wasn't there. And obviously every time is different. Sometimes it'll take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but definitely across the board, fighting it or feeding it didn't get me anywhere good. So going back to the question in terms of distraction, I mean, I think there's a time and place for distraction. I don't generally like using distraction in all of my challenges and in all the time. And a hobby is good to use, whenever, not even as a distraction. Usually I try to just, more recently, I just try to let it be and just continue with whatever I'm doing. It comes up again with intensity, I'll also just acknowledge it. More recently, I've been doing a lot of inner child work, so I would definitely connect to the younger parts of me and hear them out, hear what they're saying, whether it was anxiety related to a thought, hear it and ask it what it's anxious about, what is it coming to tell me, and to really, this idea is an off branch of what Tara Brach says. For who's not familiar with Tara Brach, she's a mindfulness facilitator and a Buddhist meditator of some sort. And she coins it as attend and befriend. Instead of, I think people generally get so afraid of their emotions. And, even till this day, as much as I'm saying it now, I also still think, that they'll have power over me. But when I can just attend it and befriend it as like, oh, hi, like, okay, you're here again. Like, what do you have to say this time? Or what are you here to tell me this time? And I think that's what the emotion really wants. It really wants to be heard. And when I can hear it and acknowledge it, suddenly it doesn't feel the need to overtake me in the way that if I was trying to fight it or feed it.
Sure. Before I ask my follow-up question to that, it looks like accidentally before we put on the screen our next live conversation, so I will mention that at this point, and that's going to be on March 17th at 9 p.m. with Rabbi Donnie Bauer, who does a lot of family therapy. He'll be talking about dating. Does anyone have a map is his title. And so if you like this live conversation now, make sure to put this next one on your calendar for March 17th at 9 p.m. I'm sure that one will be phenomenal as well as this one is. So to follow up on that question, so you mentioned mindfulness is very helpful for you. I believe that the most evidence-based therapy out there for OCD is exposure and response prevention. I'm curious what you've tried and what you found helpful personally.
So I've definitely heard of exposure response prevention therapy. I can't say that I've actually done that kind of therapy in the sense of, getting a therapist that uses that treatment modality. For me, it was more that I was hospitalized. I was kind of forced by the staff working together with my parents I was kind of forced to not be allowed to give in. I don't have a whole lot of recollection of, the specifics of that experience, but I do know that I was put on medication eventually for it at some point, either during the stay or after the stay. And that really, well, basically what I remember is that I was like a different person afterwards. That was the year, 17 to 18, the OCD was at the height of its intensity. After the hospitalization and the medication, it was more just like lingering effects and has its flare-ups. And, obviously everyone has to speak to their own doctor, and, the fact that this particular medication worked for me may not work for someone else, but definitely something that I would advise parents and, family members, people that are struggling, not to, I'm not going to say that medicine is always the answer for everyone or for every kind of challenge. And I definitely have my, thoughts and feelings about medication, but I can definitely speak with regards to the OCD that it was a lifesaver for me. It definitely was a lifesaver. And that's something that I just, want to put out there so that I know there is a lot of stigma and a lot of, people skeptical of taking medication. And I'm so fortunate that I was put on that. I mean, I think that these medicines are out there, and if they can be of help, there's no reason to suffer more than necessary.
So have you found that medication has been more beneficial for you than therapy has been?
So yes and no. Yes, regarding the OCD. No, regarding everything else that I struggle with. I can definitely say that the medicine, when I was put on the medicine for the OCD, that it was a lifesaver. I never went back to that intensity. Whenever I have flare-ups, I never went back to that degree.
Yeah.
Definitely much more aware of things now, and I can work with my brain a lot more. In terms of other things that I struggle for, I would have to say that medicine is not the only answer. I think there's a time and place for it. I think it can take the edge off, and it can help that a person will be at a more stable place in order to do the work. But for me, therapy was more of the answer than the OCD.
Sure.
Than medication.
As someone who often sees patients with OCD and prescribes medications, so what I find oftentimes, and it's a little bit frustrating for me, so the medications we prescribe for OCD, oftentimes they have to be at very high doses to work for OCD. We use a lot of similar medications that we would use for anxiety, depression, some other disorders, but for OCD we need very high doses. And so what I find is that people will start taking the medications, and then after a few weeks, because anyways already these medications take several weeks to have an effect, they kind of say these medications aren't working, I'm not going to keep taking these, they're not doing anything for me. In your personal experience, did you find that you were kind of comfortable with how long it took? Did it work right away, or did you have to be very patient and wait till the dose got very high, or even try multiple medications before the medication started to help you?
So with regards to the OCD, like I said before, I don't have a whole lot of memory in terms of when I was put on it, how long it took. In general, medications are very, very frustrating. I give you credit for being a psychiatrist, because I definitely would not choose that as my career. It is very frustrating, I would imagine, from a psychiatry side and from people that are struggling. It's a lot of trial and error. Many of them take 4 to 6 weeks to kick in, and when a person's struggling with that much, pain and challenge, 4 to 6 weeks is a lifetime. I don't know specifically with the medication for the OCD if it took that long. It would be hard to say, but in general, that was my experience with other medications, that it would be definitely a trial and error, switching from one to the next, trying to see what would work, what wouldn't work.
Sure.
Definitely very frustrating.
Sure. Before we get to our next question, I'm going to address the ticker on the bottom of the screen, which is advertising our creative expression contest. So right now, Refuah Nefesh is running a contest for all ages for people to submit their creative works. That could be artwork, essays, songs, poems, videos, whatever you could think of relating to mental illness. On the website, we do have a few topics to get you started, a few prompts, but really anything that you could think about mental illness. The goal is to get you talking about your mental illness, your family's mental illness, how we as a community could respond to it better, how you as a friend could respond to it better, and just really moving the conversation of mental illness into the mainstream and taking it out of the shadows. So we encourage people to submit. There's some great prizes from Target, Costco, and Amazon. The contest is open until the end of March, and so go onto the Report Office website and submit your pieces. We got another anonymous question. Someone wanted to know, other than the 12-step program, is there a way you can pray in English or other ways that will not give you the OCD symptoms?
Oh, is that the end of the question, or?
That's the end of the question, yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I appreciate the question, because I know that I mentioned that it's still a struggle for me to dive into pray, but definitely praying in English is a way around that. For the most part, I mean, I've definitely had my times where I did try a little bit of Hebrew praying, a little, and I'm fortunate that I'm very in tune with myself and very connected, and I can tell where, when it's coming from an OCD place, when it's coming from a more of a healthy place. I don't always know how to help myself, but the awareness I have. So definitely praying in English has been a way around that. Another way around the praying in general was, for me, nature is something that speaks to me a lot, and I find it, it's hard for me to have that punishing God and a loving God. It's hard to have that punishing God when I'm in nature. So that's something that definitely has helped me connect to God in a healthy way when I'm out in nature. And yeah, that's definitely something. And I try throughout, different days, different things, but to try to reform that connection to God in a healthy way. Because I do think that part of my OCD was that anxiety-based relationship of, I do it good, I'm going to get good. I don't do it good, I'm going to get bad. God is all punishing, and he's just out to get me. And a lot of that kind of things. Definitely there's still lingering obsessive thoughts of, who is God? What do I believe in? The constant, questioning that. And sometimes I just have to accept that and let it go and just be with it for where it is today. I don't think it's, although maybe my personality and my OCD would like to have all the answers today, I come to learn that that's not the way it works. So I just try to be patient, and some days it's definitely some days easier than others, I don't mean to make it rosier than it is. I don't mean to make it harder than it is. It is what it is, but there are definitely days that I have my flare-ups and can struggle to do day-to-day daily activities, and then other days where it's like quiet, and I do question then. I wonder, sometimes I try to joke with my OCD thoughts and be like, oh, hi, you missed me, you came to visit me again? Oh, okay, let's chat, let's see what's going on. But yeah, I'm not trying to make it light for people that are struggling. It's just, that's my way of coping with it at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to, I think people do often get frustrated when they hear people that are in recovery or doing well. They make it really rosy, and they feel like, okay, you're talking about your OCD, but that's nothing like my OCD. Mine never goes away. I have, I can't get rid of it. It affects me every day of my life. So I think it's really important that you're kind of giving that honest view, because for a lot of people, even when it's doing well, it's still not perfect. You also reminded me of, we have a fantastic post on our website, on our blog, written by someone who experiences almost chronic suicidal ideation. And they spoke about how the suicidal thoughts almost became their friend, how they kind of got to know the suicidal thoughts and would talk to them. And it really did lighten it up a little bit and help them. And I think that is, in many ways, a healthy coping mechanism, to not just let it torment you, but to, it's in your life, you can't always get rid of it. So befriend it, get to know it a little bit better, and don't just give up by listening to it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has been helpful. And to all the listeners out there who are struggling or have a family member struggling, definitely not painting it rosy. I am fortunate for where I'm holding in recovery, but that doesn't discredit the fact that that I am very well aware of the torture. Even with recovery, there's still torturous days. And in the height of my struggle, no, it was, I wasn't even aware that I was struggling. So maybe in a way it was a little bit easier because I didn't have the pain attached to it, but I was anything far from functioning or rosy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think anyone along the way missed signs that might have helped you get treatment and help earlier? Whether that's friends, parents, teachers, anyone that you've interacted with. Is there anything that you feel that someone missed and maybe you could enlighten us to, so that maybe if we see someone with some of the similar symptoms, we could say something to them or someone in a position to help them so that they could get treatment quicker, which may be beneficial for them?
Um, I don't think there was anything that was missed, any signs. I think it was quite clear, quite fast. Um, and I'll say, like I said before, I don't have clear memory of like the transition of, when I was, let's say, praying regularly to praying excessively. But something does tell me that it was kind of a quick shift. Maybe it became like 2 hours of Shemona Esrei and then it went to 3 hours, but it wasn't like, 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. It wasn't a very slow progression. I think all OCD stems from anxiety and it's fear-based. So I think maybe focusing on, or, becoming more familiar with anxiety symptoms and realizing that like something's going on with that, because I think that's definitely, anxiety can play out in many different ways in people, and OCD is just one form. But I think that might be something that can be helpful if, if family members or teachers, friends realize that like there's something going on. I think anxiety is easier to recognize than specific obsessions going on in the brain.
Sure. So you mentioned you're 2 to 3 hours from Mona Esrei. And I think to someone untrained, you're almost like the model based Yaakov girl. So much Kavana, that's amazing. Was there a time when people were really praising you for this? Or, you said it was pretty obvious. Maybe it was obvious to you. Do you think it was obvious to everyone else as well? Or were people thinking, wow, that's amazing that you could do that?
So I think for the most part, it was obvious to my parents for sure, to my friends, to my school teachers. I don't know if it was immediate, but it was definitely clear. I only recall one specific incident, and the reason why I was shaking my head was, regarding that one incident, where, right, it does look as something to be praising someone for. And I kind of laugh, but also kind of feel the pain when I say it, that, if only it was, me trying to be more connected. It was anything far from connection, and it wasn't exciting. It wasn't a pleasure experience. It was filled with a lot of pain and torture. But I would imagine that if this particular incident where one person did say something, it may have been that she was uncomfortable with the fact that I was davening for so long, and maybe it did look odd to her, so that was the way she handled it. But it did come across as like praising, like, oh wow, you're so special, you daven for so long. And that could get sticky because, there is that, I guess it's a balance, there is that wanting a person to, do things with more love, more intention, more connection, but then, making sure that it doesn't go to the other extreme.
Sure. How did that make you feel when the woman praised you?
So I think the OCD pretty much took over my brain during that, intense year. I don't think that I was really so aware of what was going on around me. I don't even think I realized that I was in that much, that it wasn't even painful. Like now, if I get these obsessive thoughts and I feel the compulsion to act out, the pain is there because I know that it's not coming from a healthy place. I don't even think I realized that I was not being healthy, to the extent that when my parents were working with the hospital and trying to make me daven less, like to me that felt like the ultimate sin. Like I didn't understand why they were trying to make me do that. I thought they were all trying to harm me and trying to tell me to do something that to my mind was just not okay. So I don't think that comment, had such an impact. But I do hear it in the sense of, it can look praiseworthy.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that people, it's important that people are aware of. And, I think moderation is one of my favorite words in the dictionary. And that's with everything, there's something could be beautiful. And like I said earlier, that's the way I like to differentiate between if it's coming from a healthy place or not. If it's wrapped up with pressure and intensity, to me that feels unhealthy. If it's coming with like love and beauty, that as a general rule, I like to use that to figure out.
So for someone viewing it from the outside, where is the line that you would draw for Shimona Esrei? When do you stop praising and start getting a little bit nervous that maybe there's something going on?
So I think there's, and I had this even when I was trying to recover. I would question myself, like, am I really saying it that long? Maybe I just talk slow. Like maybe I just, maybe I'm not like, it's hard for myself to even remember exactly what was going on during that 3 hours from yesterday. I'm not sure what I was saying, or, I don't think I repeated words twice. I know there are elements of OCD where people repeat things twice. I don't think I actually repeated. I think I just was concentrating. The pressure to concentrate and to get the concentration right was more of what took me that long. But I guess it's a hard call. I think there's a standard for how long it should take. I mean, yes, there are people that do verbally, express themselves slower, but I think, to me, thinking about it, it sounds pretty like it would be obvious to me. And maybe that's because I struggled. I can recognize when someone's anxious in the flash. I can, I pick up on these things because I've experienced it. But I don't know. I guess I would say anything longer than 10, 15 minutes for Shimona Esrei just sounds like, okay, something's going on here. But
Sure.
Yeah, it's hard to say specifically.
Sure. Again, for those of us who are just joining us, we're with Simmy Weinberger, who's a very inspirational person, talking to us about her experiences with OCD. We only have a few minutes left, but if you want to quickly send another question for her to answer, we'll also try to forward ones on to her that we don't have time to take on the air, but you send comments to info@refuahanefesh.org, or you could post them on the Facebook live video if you're watching from there. And if we don't get to them here, so we'll try to pass those on to Simmy and have her respond to you. Before we get back to the conversation, I do want to plug two things that we do at Refuah Nefesh here. One of our main objectives is to form a support community for people that may have similar experiences and maybe don't have the network yet or are afraid to speak out in public, but are looking for advice. So on our website, you could find our support room, and in there you could create an anonymous username, ask your questions, get your answers, scroll through and see what's been helpful for other people, see what kind of things are on other people's mind, and help each other out, form the wonderful community that we know we have here with mental illness, so that people could really get the questions that they have answered without feeling shame. We're also, in the next month or two, we'll be starting an Ask the Doctor feature. We have a wonderful, both adult and child and adolescent board certified psychiatrist who will be taking questions from people, and we'll be giving some professional thoughts on those questions. So if you have questions you would like answered by a doctor, feel free to send those to info@refuahanefesh.org, and we will consider those when we start our Ask the Doctor feature, and stay tuned for more details on that. So now coming back to this conversation, Simmy, we only have a few minutes left. What is a message that you would like to leave people with that may be watching now or in the future?
So for the people that are struggling, in any degree of how they're struggling, definitely want to put it out there that you are not alone. Even as wonderful as it sounds like I'm doing now, I get it. I've been there. I still have my days. You're not alone. And if there's any way that I can be of help to anyone, I'd be happy to be of help. I'm also a very big advocate of having support. There are definitely some people in my life who I call my angels, and I really don't know where I would be without them today. So definitely support is a big one. For family members, to keep in mind, and I'm sure it's, seeing your side of things, I'm sure it's frustrating, I'm sure it's not easy, and I'm not, discounting that. But to also keep in mind that the person is struggling and they did not choose this. It's not like someone wakes up one morning and says, oh, today I think I'm in the mood of struggling with OCD. By far not. And it's not as simple as just like snapping out of it or stop getting so worried or stop, just relax and calm down. It's really not that simple. And it's really not something that anyone that hasn't experienced can fully understand, although I do like that idea, Dr. Mintz, of the earphones. I'm not sure how we can get that going, but I do like that. And I've told
Anybody
people in
wants
the
to
past,
fund it, we'd be happy to try to start
yeah,
that up.
right?
No, not there's watching.
Yes, please. And you can take my brain for a sample. So, it's definitely like, I tell people all the time, try being in my brain for 1 hour, then you'll know why I'm always exhausted. It's definitely not something that people that haven't experienced can understand fully. But to know that they're not doing this for fun, they're not doing this for attention, and that there is help out there, whether it's psychiatry, medication, to reach out to, and I do hear the stigma in the Orthodox community all over. Thank God I've never bought into that stigma, and that's the reason why I feel so comfortable doing this. But I am fortunate for that. My parents did get help right away for all my struggles. My classmates were aware of it. My teachers were aware of it. So I am very fortunate, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. But even, if you just keep it between you and your child, between you and a family member, whoever it is, without broadcasting it, to know that you're not alone and that there is help, and to seek it, not promising that the answers are always there right away and that it's always a linear path, but there is help. There really is. And it does get better. The fact that I'm here today sharing all this with you is a miracle.
Yeah, and so inspiring. I know for me and so many other people that you're willing to come on and do this despite the potential stigma that you could be experiencing with it. Before we end, you mentioned Cheskeni, which is a phenomenal organization. I definitely encourage women within the Jewish community to go to them. I know they, it's for wherever you are in the religious spectrum within Judaism. They want to bring you into their community, and they're a phenomenal support community. I encourage people to go there. Refuah Nefesh, we have some resources with us. Please check out our website. Do you have any other resources you would recommend off the top of your head for people that are struggling with OCD, or for people that might have family members with OCD?
With OCD specifically, the only other thing that I can think of, although I don't really have any information about it. I've never actually tried it, but they have 12-step groups for everything. And I know that there is a 12-step group for OCD. There's OCDanonymous.org. I've never actually tried one. I am familiar with other 12-step groups, but I would imagine that that's definitely another, place to be heard, be understood, get support from other people that are struggling. And I think if you just Googled OCD Anonymous, or it might be OCDanonymous.org, the website, you should be able to come up. And most 12-step groups have live meetings, face-to-face meetings, and phone meetings. So that might be another option.
Fantastic. I think those are all very helpful. Again, Simmy, thank you so much for your bravery and for coming on and talking about your story. I know it's, for the people watching now, I think it was very helpful, and it's going to be put on Facebook, YouTube. It'll be out there for people to see for years to come, and I know you're going to be a major source of inspiration for them. And we definitely wish you all the best in terms of your ongoing recovery and in your ability to continue to inspire other people and go out and let people know that they're not alone.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I feel it's an honor to be able to be here sharing my experience hopefully strength and hope as well. And that's always been, you know, from when I started struggling, that's always been in my mind, that if I can, you know, at least help people from what I've been through, then it would be worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.